Photoshop has several tools that you can use for painting and erasing your pixels. They use some of the brush techniques and they have some of their own special features. So we're going to explore things like the eraser tools and the history brush and the mixer brush and some other tools. Let's take a closer look. Okay, well, I've got this sailboat here and I want to get rid of some of the background. There's a lot of different techniques, but we're going to take advantage of our magic eraser tool. Now, I'm noticing that this image has been flattened. It has this background image, and I just want to delete some of that sky so that I can replace it with some other sky. The magic eraser works a lot like the magic wand in the sense that it's going to delete based on color. And so if I click on the sky, which is pretty much the same color, bam, it's already gone, and it's something I can just keep clicking on. Now, I'm going to use my cap lock, and when I click on the cap lock, it actually gives me the size of the cursor, so it helps me target my area better. If you turn the cap locks off, you go back to the shape, you go back to the brush type. So it's a nice toggle in there, and I can zoom in a little bit, and I can just start clicking on the parts that I want to delete, and keep going until I'm satisfied. And I probably would have a couple clicks in here, but it's kind of fun to just kind of click and get rid of them. And this works pretty well because because the sky is pretty close to the same color and there's so much contrast, and I like this option. So as I'm going through and I'm getting rid of some of the content in here, I also notice there's some options you have with the magic eraser, and the tolerance affects how many pixels it's going to erase. If the tolerance is lower, I'll just use that scrubby slider here. If it's lower, then you're going to actually remove fewer pixels because fewer colors are going to be inside that range. And if the higher it gets, the more pixels you're going to erase. Let's go ahead and right click and we'll just reset the tool. In fact, might as well reset all tools while we're at it. And just kind of keep going. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and fit that to the screen here. Now I'm going to bring in the big sky. So go here to the big sky, get my move tool, and just drag it up to the window and back down again. The entire image comes through, change the stacking layer, and I can just kind of position it the way I like it. I like that. Now as I'm doing that, I can see some artifacts here, some pieces that didn't quite get erased. And that's where I can actually use my eraser tool. And the eraser, let's turn the cap lock off. The eraser acts like a brush. In fact, you can change it to be a pencil or a block. I like the block when I'm trying to do very geometric erasing. And I like the brush when it's a more soft erase, especially if I might have some blending I might want to do, or I'm not quite sure exactly how many pixels. And I can use the same tools with the brackets, the left and right brackets, to resize this brush. So some different options. You also have the option called the pencil. Go ahead and click on that. And it's another way, it's going to be a hard shape instead of a softer shape. So I usually tend to use that brush, which makes it a softer option. And you can slide it as you see fit. Let's go ahead and scroll through, and we can clean up some other elements in here. Looks pretty good. And I could even go back to my magic eraser, and I got to make sure I'm on the right layer there, but I can start erasing some elements, erasing some of those pixels just by clicking. Now, if I end up getting a little carried away and I start erasing too many things, and I decide, oh, I want maybe a do-over, a nice option, of course, is history. Now, you could go back into history, and in the history, you can actually just start going back in steps, going backward, and recapturing that image. But if you also could use what's called the history brush, and the history brush will paint pixels back on your image. I'll make sure I have the right one. It's going to paint history back on my image, and if I start painting in there, it's going to give me that return. Now it's actually based on the state of your history, and by default that's going to be your when you first opened the document. So let me go ahead and hide this layer, and you can really see it if I start going to the sky layer and I start painting. It's actually painting that sailboat right onto the sky layer because that's the history. Let's go ahead and remove that. And I'll remove a few other things and step back a little bit to a point that I like it. So I'm going to use this to our advantage and actually capture the history as it looks now with the sky and the sailboat all together and use that to paint another scene. Now, in order to really capture the history so I can paint it, I'm going to merge these together, these layers. So I'm going to go to the Layer menu and Merge Visible. It merges it all to one layer. I'm going to create a new history state. So click on New Snapshot, scroll up, and that creates a new snapshot, a new state of history here. And notice that I can use either one to become my focal point when I'm painting. So that becomes our new point. And I'm going to actually go back in history to the point where I still had those two layers and I had the paint, basically the way I liked it. And notice that my snapshot is still in place, so I can still use that to start painting. And I'm going to go ahead and just create a brand new blank layer here. And if I use my history brush, let's make it a larger brush. Oh, we've got the cap lock on, that's why I can't see it. There you go, turn the cap lock off. And I can actually start painting, and it's painting relative to this snapshot. I can also do a Control-A to fill everything, and I could Edit menu to fill, and you can even fill with history. So go ahead and do that. Deselect it, and I filled it all with history. I'm going to go and Control-A, delete, and then deselect, so it's all blank. Now, in addition to the history brush, there's also the art history brush. The art history brush, just like the history brush, is going to paint back relative to the snapshot that you have selected, whichever one is your point. But the difference is it's going to change those pixels. It's going to actually sample the pixels that from your history based on what you also have selected, and you can create some interesting effects. So what we're going to do here is we're going to change this to a different type of brush, kind of a long curly brush here. I'm going to bump up the size so it's a lot bigger. And I'm going to start by just getting a, let's say maybe kind of a background color. And as I start painting, you're noticing that it's pulling in those colors of our original image here, of that snapshot. I can go back and make it a little bit smaller now and kind of get some more of those details. I'm just trying to create like a background effect. Now I'm going to go ahead and make the brush smaller, okay, and change to a different style. One thing to be aware of, let's do more like the tight long here, there we go. One thing to be aware of is that depending on the resolution of your image, that's really going to affect what kind of brush style you want to use and how big of the brush you're going to be using. Okay? But as I'm painting here and I'm using some different brushes, now I'm getting that boat, and here's a sail, and it's creating some really fun effects here. And I could even do this on layer on top of layer as well to give me some more options to paint back. Okay. And just kind of keep going until I create the effect that I'm looking for. I kind of like that. And as you make, the more often you let go of your mouse, the easier it is to undo the steps in history, because each of those steps right there is considered something I could keep or let go. Now, in addition to the art history brush, which is, I like it because it's has all these presets in here, we also have a tool that was introduced in the last version, so it's newer than the art history brush, and that is the mixer brush. And so the mixer brush, which is right here underneath the brush, is going to sample the colors from your foreground or whatever your eyedropper, and it's going to sample those colors with what you're painting with. Actually, you have some choices of how you want to mix them, and you can create a painting effect, but with a little bit more of customization. Now, I did a very rough draft in here, but here's an example of the photo, and using the mixer brush and taking some shortcuts, I made a real simple rendition of this Eiffel Tower. Let's try this with the sailboat and see what we can come up with. I'm going to go ahead and create 2 new layers. The first layer I'm going to go ahead and fill with our regular history. So just go to Edit, Fill, History. Right, there it is. And remember, it's still using that same state. And the next one we're going to use to start painting with the mixer brush. Now with the mixer brush, it has some default settings. I'm going to first of all choose Sample All Layers. And it's going to sample the layers that are visible. But that way when I'm painting, I can get the ink or the colors from the layer below on layer 3. And then I also have some options where I can choose what kind of styles I want, whether how much ink it's going to pull from the layer below it, like if that ink is wet, and how much paint is on the brush and how it's going to mix it together. And you could do a custom, or you can use some of these presets. And when I'm doing my first initial one, I like having the wet because it blends in. Especially it's nice when I'm trying to create an effect where I'm using my pixels. And the wetter it is, the easier it is for me to create this image without having to do as much of the work. So I'm going to use one of these options in here. And I'll try, how about this, with some extra ink. And you can see how it's changing some of those settings. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sample a color. Now I'm going to hold down my eye, and that turns on the eyedropper temporarily, and I'm going to click on some color in the sail, and I'm going to let go of that eye. And sometimes you have to do it fast, because right now I noticed that it just snapped back to the eye brush. I'm going to press the letter B to return to the mixer brush. And again, it all depends on how fast you do it. So if you do it fast enough, you can see how it just bounces right back to the mixer brush. If you hold it down a little too long, then it switches to your eyedropper. You got to go back to your mixer brush there. And then I'm going to go ahead and choose some different brushes. And these brushes that we have, which you could also pull up from here, there's a lot of options, but several of them are actual paintbrush-like styles. And they are these bristle brushes that you can even customize, but you can pick something that you think would create an interesting effect. You could even go into the brush settings and make some changes. And some of these changes are going to be different depending on if you're using your mouse to paint, like I am, or if you're using a pen, a stylus tool to paint. Okay, so I'm going to start with something kind of a broad stroke here. And I can even make it a little bit wider. And again, the size is going to depend on the resolution that you have. But I've got that color that I'm using for my sailboat. And I'm just going to start painting. And it's actually blending that color with the background. So as I'm pulling into the red, it's actually pulling that in. And it might take a little bit of time, depending, again, on the resolution for it to render. There's the engine in Photoshop 6, the Mercury engine, is a lot faster. So things render a lot faster than before. But I've noticed when I had this resolution, I had this a larger size, and it just took a lot longer to paint. So just a little FYI on that. Now I can always go back and resample some of the pixels. So I'm just going to go ahead and do an eye drop and get that blue color, and I can start painting to create some of the sky. There you go. You can see it kind of taking its time to get all those pixels in there. And again, that's just going to be an issue of how long you paint, what kind of brush you have, and what's what's the setting. But you can start to see that as you start painting with that, you can create some effects. And you can even blend that with your art history brush if you want to create some different effects in there. Or you could blend it with your regular history brush. In addition to the mixer brush, there's some other tools like the pencil tool, which allows you to create crisp lines. Let's see if you can. Very thin, crisp lines. And I often will use that for making black lines or some shadow effect. And then you also have this color replacement tool. And the color replacement tool is going to allow you to paint a color cast over your image, but it maintains the shadows and highlights. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and get a darker color here. And I'm just going to make this a larger area. And watch when I paint over that boat. Let's see here. Oh, because there's no pixels on that boat. Let's change it to the other layer. And watch when I paint over the boat here. And you can see how it's pulling in the color, whatever I happen to choose, is pulling in that color, but it's preserving the whites and the darks and those hues. So that's another nice brush tool that you can take advantage of when you're working with Photoshop. So you have your history brush, you have your art history brush, you have some other tools like the erasers and the color replacement tool, and all those tools are going to give you even more options for creating artistic effects within Photoshop.